Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm Florence, and I'm going to be defense cap for the next following mock trial season.
And I'm Andrew, and I'll be your assistant defense captain.
Yeah, so we plan on making a bunch of videos over the summer so that new members and like anyone on the team can just review content if you need to. So the first video we'll be starting out with is the kind of like introduction to mock trial, like just like information about mock trial. So yeah. So first we'll be going over like what mock trial is. Okay, cool. So mock trial is basically an extracurricular activity or like a club at school in which high school students can play roles like attorneys, witnesses, and other positions like clerk and bailiffs in imitation court trials. So these court trials basically imitate like real court trials. That's why it's called mock trial. And each year, a fictional case is issued that all mock trial teams get. And these cases can be things like murder cases or human trafficking, and basically, we get a case packet, and this case packet basically gives information that we need to know about the trial that we refer to throughout the season. So here's an example of a case packet. So this is People versus Davidson, and it was a murder trial. And so if you can see at the top, this is the fact situation. So it basically gives a brief introduction to basically like what happened and what the situation is. And then here are like pretrial arguments. So we'll be going over what pretrial is a bit later on, but pretrial is basically like the first part of the mock, like the court, like basically trial. And so now we have like witness statements. And so these are statements given from witnesses at the time of the event. So when the murder scene happened, these are like witnesses that are like basically testifying as to what happened. So now we have two exhibits. So exhibits are basically references that people point to throughout the trial. So for example, this is a map of Acorn Park in which people can point to kind of reference and basically drawing more detail to give a better understanding of what happened in the scene and like what exactly like took place.
All right, so the objectives of here are the objectives for mock trial. The bulk of our season is spent on building our team's case. So the case components include pretrial arguments where the pretrial team will argue constitutional issues. Most of these issues will involve the First, the Fourth, or the Fifth Amendment. We'll also have direct and cross examinations as well as opening and closing statements, depending on what role you are. At competitions, we compete against other schools in mock trials, and our team is arguing the opposite of another school's team. So if we're on defense, for example, we're going against a prosecution team from a different school.
Yeah. So, what are the goals of mock trial? So, the goals of mock trial are basically to learn more about the justice system and also to analyze some like really interesting cases. And so, during the mock trial season, mock trial is a really interesting club because you get a case packet, but you can analyze that case packet and interpret it in like whatever way you want. So, you can basically make kind of like shift your narrative to however you want, and you can basically like it's very like up to you. And so mock trial also gives you a real courtroom experience in which you get to go to the Alameda County courtroom and actually sit down at the desks of real attorneys and real judges. And so that's really, really fun and interesting, especially for people who are planning on going into law or public policy. And so we also get to work with attorney coaches throughout the season. And these attorney coaches are really experienced. They're actual like attorneys and like lawyers, and so it's really interesting being able to work with attorneys throughout the year. And you also get to develop public speaking, teamwork, and analytical skills.
Right, so what are the roles in our mock trial team? So we have three teams actually. The first is pretrial, the second prosecution, and the third is defense. You'll be mainly working with your own team based on your assignment. For pretrial, you'll be an attorney arguing whether evidence is valid to be used in court. And as I mentioned earlier, this evidence always touches upon a constitutional issue. You're not arguing whether the evidence is true, but only if it should be admissible based on the Constitution. Another thing that we should note is that in pretrial arguments are kind of like Supreme Court oral arguments. you basically present your argument, and the judge can question you based on parts of your argument. And another crucial thing is that when you're arguing, you shouldn't argue the facts. You're not arguing, like we just said, you're not arguing whether the evidence is true or whether it has substance, but you're arguing questions of law. So that's something that you should keep in mind if you are assigned to the pretrial team. Here's an example of a pretrial argument from the 2018 mock trial finals. The timestamp is at 9 minutes and 4 seconds. We'll provide a link to the video in the description below.
Yep. So the next two teams are the prosecution and defense teams. So the prosecution and defense teams basically like they work and they basically function during the entirety or the majority of the trial. So pre-trial happens before the actual trial, but for the main trial, the prosecution and defense teams basically go back and forth. And so within the prosecution and defense teams, there are two main roles. The first role is attorneys, and attorneys are basically like the lawyers in the situation. They work with assigned witnesses in order to make direct examinations and also create cross examinations for witnesses from the opposing side. So we'll be going into more detail about like what direct and cross examinations are in a later video, but they're basically direct examinations are for lawyers to speak with witnesses from their own side, and then cross examinations are for lawyers to speak with witnesses from the other side. An opening and closing argument basically does what the name like suggests. An opening statement opens a trial and a closing statement closes a trial. And so the second role is our witnesses. And so witnesses basically have to memorize the witness statement, which is what we mentioned earlier on in this video. So in the case packet, there are different statements provided by different witnesses. And so if you do play a witness, you have to play that specific role. And you also have to work with your assigned attorney to basically like memorize your direct examination. And also, you want to be prepared for cross-examination from the other team. So you'll also be working with your assigned attorney in order to make sure that you're prepared and that you can answer like any questions that the other team might give to you. So here are timestamps for opening statements and closing statements, and also direct and cross-examinations. So yeah, we'll be putting this in the link in the description as well.
Now, apart from the pretrial team, the prosecution and the defense teams, we also have clerks and bailiffs. Now, the clerk keeps time. So if a mock trial involves time limits for direct examinations, cross-examinations, opening and closing statements, and even pretrial arguments. So the clerk ensures that no one goes past the time limit, and they also ensure that when someone is over the time limit, to stop them and allow them to finish up their sentence. Now the bailiff swears all the witnesses in. So whenever a witness is up for direct examination, the bailiff will call them up to the stand, and then they'll be sworn in. Now we will be deciding roles in October based on your preference, availability, skill level, and commitment to the club. Everyone will have a role, and you can request to be on the same team as your friend. Now, work will be split up in your team, so don't worry about having to bear a large burden, because you'll have friends working with you or teammates.
Yeah, we'll be deciding roles fairly early on in the season, but October is just a tentative date, so we're not sure about that still. Yeah, so as mentioned earlier, our hope is to have in-person competitions next season. We most likely will. And so these will take place at the Alameda County Superior Courthouse. And here's a photo of what that looks like. And so this is a real courthouse. There are real scoring attorneys and real judges. And so you will like get the actual vibe of like being in a trial. And so in person, trials are just really, really fun. And so yeah, we made a lot of memories in this courtroom.
All right, so how does the competition work? So for 3 weeks, competitions are held on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Normally, our prosecution team goes on Tuesday and competes against another school's defense team. And our defense team goes on Thursday and competes against another school's prosecution team. And only half of our team goes at once. Pre-trial has to go for all competitions, well, at least pre-trial for each team. So pretrial is also separated into pretrial prosecution and pretrial defense. So if the prosecution team is going on like Tuesday, then the pretrial prosecution team will go with them. Now the clerk will also go with the prosecution team and the bailiff will go with the defense.
Yeah. So here's a basic order of what trial looks like. So trial starts out with introductions in which both competitors or people from both sides basically stand up and say, "Hi, my name is Florence, and I will be delivering the openings. I'm the defense attorney for like defending this person, and I'll be delivering the opening statement for the opening statement for the trial, and also delivering the cross examination for X person and the direct examination for X person." So the introductions are basically like introducing who you are, and they basically go through a rundown of each person in each team and give introductions. After introductions, there are pretrial arguments come in for a short period of time in which both pretrial teams, so one attorney from each pretrial side, gets up and basically like does their like the pretrial of the case of the court. And then after that, we have opening statements. So we have one opening statement from defense and one opening statement from prosecution. And opening statements basically open up the trial, basically give a bit of information and kind of give like a taste into like the narrative that that team is going to be taking on for the rest of the trial. So then after that, we have direct and cross examinations, and these basically take up the majority of the trial. Direct and cross examinations are when one, so prosecution always goes first for direct examinations, and then so prosecution witnesses go first, and so prosecution attorneys direct examine their attorneys, while defense attorneys from the opposing team cross examine those attorneys, and then they switch over to defense. So then afterwards, there are closing arguments, which are basically like the same thing as opening, but they summarize what happened in the trial during cross and direct examinations, and they close a court. After that is the verdict from the judge. And so the judge basically delivers a verdict of whether or not they found the defendant guilty or not guilty. But the thing about the verdict is that the verdict like does not whatsoever affect who wins the trial. It doesn't matter if X team like wins the verdict. It doesn't matter if the like defendant is found to be not guilty if the prosecution scores more points from these scoring attorneys and the judge. So the points that come out of the trial are what actually wins you the round. The verdict does not matter. So then after the verdict, you get feedback from the scoring attorneys and judge, and then you find out who wins a trial, possibly a day to a couple days later when feedback is sent back to the team. Yeah, and so for every trial, there are 4 witnesses on each side. So there are 8 total witnesses, and at least for our team, we can have multiple people per witness. So yeah, everyone gets a role. And then after that, each side has one pretrial attorney per trial. But then again, there we can have like more pretrial attorneys than just one. And then also there are 2 to 3 trial attorneys per each side. Keep in mind that all of these numbers are dependent on the like for one single trial, but in the like holistically we can have more of each role for the whole team. And then there's also the clerk and bailiff, the judge, and scoring attorneys.
All right, so how does scoring work? So scoring attorneys will always give points for specific things like delivery, pacing, demeanor, evidence presented, etc. So if you're acting aggressive towards a certain witness from the opposing side, the scoring attorneys will probably not take that as a good thing. So, but if you're like really laid back and you're accepting every answer from the opposing team's witness without like considering whether that harms your case or whether it benefits your case, then the scoring attorneys will probably take points for that off as well. Now, whichever side has the most points from the combined scores from the scoring attorneys, because there will be most likely more than one, that school will win the round. And we will be we will be going for 3 prosecution and 3 defense rounds. So that's 6 total in 3 weeks. So 2 rounds per week. And depending on how well we do, we can advance to higher level rounds. So we start in the Alameda County mock trial competition. And if we do well, we'll go to the semifinals. And if we win in the semifinals, we'll go to the finals, and then we go to the states.
Yeah. So our plan for this year, at least like tentatively, is to basically until the case packet arrives later on in the year, we're probably going to go over like general topics and basically like go over like different things that you'll need to know for trial. And then sometime within October or like around October, we'll be deciding roles. And then from there, we'll be breaking off into our respective teams. So either defense, pretrial, or prosecution. And each team will work with your captain and your assistant captain. And you'll be able to basically like prepare cross examinations and DXs and basically like prepare for the trial. Then after that, until January, during January, we're going to do a lot of practice rounds within the team and also out. So we'll be doing practice rounds with teams from other schools as well. And then in February, that's competition season. So competitions roll around basically like within the span of like 2 weeks, and we have multiple competitions per week.
All right, as a member, you have certain commitments. The first is that meetings will tentatively be every Thursday after school in the B-Wing cafeteria from 3 to 4:30 p.m. Attendance is important. It shows how dedicated you are to the team, and we will decide positions based on the attendance of every member. We also expect you to be productive during meetings, so don't goof off or don't play video games. And I know it sounds kind of ironic because I do that sometimes, but it's important that we get things done. Like there will be time for us to, relax, have fun, but our priority is developing our case and finalizing it so that we do well at the competition. Now, we also expect you to be responsible for the work you have depending on your role, and there is barely any time spent outside of meetings except for competitions. And you only need to go, and you most likely only have to go to one competition there. Now, if you cannot make any meetings or competitions, please talk to us and we can figure something out for you.
Yep. So we understand that we all have different commitments and activities, but if you aren't able to make meetings, you can always still participate. Just make sure you're as dedicated as possible. And if you have any issues, you can always talk to us and we'll be more than willing and open to help you out depending on what you need. And there's like no experience is needed. Like I didn't have any experience when I joined mock trial. Like Andrew probably had way more experience than me, but still like had limited mock trial experience. And so it's like totally okay if you know nothing about mock trial, but you get a lot from the activity. And so we like highly encourage like everyone to join. It's also like really, really fun and you get a lot of exposure to the justice system. And even if you don't want to be a lawyer, there's always like college apps. And so um, yeah, so if you aren't already, make sure you join the 2020 to 2021 Facebook group for mock trial. I think we'll be renaming it for next year, but that's what it's called right now. And so that's all. So
Thanks for
stay tuned.
watching.
Yeah, stay tuned for other videos. Yay.